Ex- Imagine you're in the kitchen where you're baking a cake and you decide to just throw in a pinch of salt as a rule of thumb.
Right, yeah. Or like maybe you're hanging a picture frame in the hallway.
Exactly. And you just
Either.
eyeball the center using a quick rule of thumb. It's an entirely innocent everyday phrase.
Oh, absolutely.
You've probably used it yourself, at least a dozen times this month without even giving it a second thought.
Yeah, we all do.
But what if I told you that for decades, millions of people fully believed those exact words were rooted in a really horrific, centuries-old law about domestic violence?
It's honestly one of the most persistent and really unsettling linguistic myths out there.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, we use the phrase constantly, right? Just as a shorthand for a reliable but kind of imprecise guideline.
Right, like a guess.
Exactly. Yet underneath that harmless utility, there's this heavy, dark shadow that has just followed it around for generations.
And that shadow is exactly why we're here today. Because for this deep dive, we're working from a stack of incredible source material.
Oh, yeah. Tons of articles, etymological research, historical records.
Yeah, and this material completely deconstructs the true origin of the phrase rule of thumb. So our mission today is to track down the actual historical timeline.
We really want to find out how a simple, practical measurement tool somehow became entangled in this wild, grim, etymological folklore.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where does the dark myth actually start? Because before we can get to the real craftsmen and builders who coined the phrase, we have to look at the fake history that hijacked it.
We do, yeah.
What is the legend that everyone just assumed was true?
Well, to understand how the truth got buried, you really have to look at the sheer shock value of the myth itself.
Okay.
The popular history, basically, the legend passed around by amateur etymologists, internet forums, and even some well-meaning educators over the years.
Yeah, I've definitely heard it repeated in school.
Right. They claim that rule of thumb originated from an archaic English law, and it's an incredibly grim narrative.
Very grim.
According to the story, there was a legal statute that explicitly permitted a husband to beat his wife, provided that the stick he used for this domestic chastisement was no broader or thicker than his own thumb.
I mean, just a deeply disturbing, visceral image to attach to something you'd casually say while, like, adjusting a thermostat.
Or writing a line of code, yeah.
Exactly. It completely poisons the phrase once you hear it.
It absolutely does. And, the reason this myth had such incredible staying power wasn't just the shock value.
What else was it?
What made it so believable to the general public was that the story didn't just float around as a vague rumor. The myth actually names a specific villain.
Right, they gave the monster a face.
Exactly. Over the years, people began pointing the finger directly at a man named Sir Francis Buller.
Wait, who was he? Because that name sounds so specific.
Buller was a very real, famously no-nonsense judge in 18th century England.
Okay.
And by all historical accounts, he wasn't exactly a beloved figure. He was known on the bench for delivering harsh, overtly prejudiced judgments.
No.
Yeah, he had this reputation for a swaggering, blustering arrogance. He basically embodied the archetype of the oppressive, out-of-touch aristocrat.
I mean, that is the absolute perfect casting for a story like this.
Isn't it?
Yeah, if you need a villain to invent a cruel law, the arrogant 18th century judge is exactly who you'd pick.
Exactly. And the popular theory claims that it was Buller who formally introduced this grim rule of thumb ruling in the year 1782.
1782, got it.
And the reason that specific year is always cited, well, that's the anchor of the entire myth.
Why? What happened in 1782?
In 1782, Sir Francis Buller appeared in a satirical cartoon in the English press. And in that political cartoon, he was explicitly labeled with the nickname Judge Thumb.
Okay, stop right there, because this is exactly like a modern internet meme.
Oh, it really is.
Think about it. You have a highly visible public figure who acts a certain way, and somebody makes a satirical meme to mock them.
Right, just to poke fun.
Exactly. It's meant to be a joke, right?
Yeah.
A temporary political critique for people living in that specific moment.
Yeah.
But then, 200 years later, people who have zero context for the original joke see that meme, and they take it as literal documented history.
They completely miss the punchline.
Right. They point to the image and say, look, he's called Judge Thumb in print. This proves the wife-beating story is true.
Yeah.
That 18th century political cartoon is basically just an antique meme that got completely out of hand.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly your analogy captures the mechanics of folklore.
Really?
Yeah. Because the human brain craves a neat, compelling narrative, especially one that gives us a clear villain to be outraged by.
We do love a good villain.
We do. The existence of a real historical artifact, that 1782 satirical cartoon, gave a false, enduring legitimacy to a completely fabricated story.
So it anchored the lie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People look back, they see the cartoon labeling him Judge Thumb, and they think, well, there's the proof.
Right. Seeing is believing.
They take a satirical drawing and reverse engineer a literal historical narrative out of it. The cartoon acts as an anchor, weighing down a myth that otherwise would have just, floated away in the breeze.
Which naturally brings us to the actual evidence. Because having a cartoon from 1782 sitting in an archive somewhere feels like a massive smoking gun.
It definitely looks bad.
Yeah, if I'm just casually browsing history, I look at that and say, well, case closed.
Right.
So, since a political cartoon isn't actually a binding legal document, what happens when we scrutinize the legal and historical timeline? Like, what do the law books from 1782 actually say?
The entire narrative collapses instantly.
Really?
Instantly.
Yeah, when we dig into the actual legal records of the era, there's a glaring, massive void where this supposed law should be.
Wow.
No English law, no statute, and no recorded precedent has ever made any kind of overt reference to a rule of thumb along the lines of Buller's supposed ruling.
None. Not even like a weird, obscure local ordinance somewhere. Zero. Nothing. And to be absolutely certain, we can look to the 19th century. There is an acclaimed English biographer and legal expert named Edward Foss.
Okay, who was he?
Foss was meticulous. He dedicated his life to compiling an exhaustive biographical dictionary of English judges.
So he knew his stuff.
He really did.
Yeah.
And he had no reason to protect Buller's reputation.
Right, he was just reporting the facts.
Yeah, exactly. But after combing through mountains of legal records specifically regarding Sir Francis Buller, Foss wrote that he had found, and I quote, no substantial evidence that the judge had ever even expressed so ungallant an opinion.
Wow. So the legal scholar who literally wrote the definitive book on these judges went looking for the Judge Thumb ruling.
And found absolutely nothing to support the domestic abuse law.
Nothing at all.
It's a ghost. But the definitive proof, the ultimate undeniable debunking fact, it doesn't even come from legal scholars.
Oh, it doesn't?
Where does it come from?
It comes from the Oxford English Dictionary.
Their entire purpose is to track the earliest printed records of the English language.
Yeah, they find out when words were first used.
Right. And according to the OED, the earliest known record of the phrase rule of thumb in print dates back to around 1658.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if we just do the basic math on that timeline.
Yeah, do the math.
1658 is a full 88 years before Sir Francis Buller was even born.
Precisely. The phrase was already in use nearly a century before the villain of the story took his first breath.
Wait. I have to push back here.
Sure.
I'm looking at this timeline, and I'm genuinely trying to make it make sense.
Okay.
If the phrase existed in print 88 years before he was born, and the ruling itself is a total myth according to the legal scholars, it feels incredibly random that a cartoonist in 1782 just happened to pick the word thumb.
It does seem random.
Right. I mean, cartoons are usually based on something real, right? Are you saying the nickname was completely baseless and the word thumb was just pulled out of thin air?
That's a fantastic question, and it highlights exactly how historical satire worked before we had the context of the internet.
How so?
Well, the nickname wasn't pulled out of thin air, but it also wasn't about domestic abuse. We have to look at how 18th century caricature actually functioned.
Okay.
Print shops back then were basically the social media feeds of the day. Cartoonists would seize on hyper-local, highly ephemeral gossip.
Oh, like inside jokes.
Exactly. They would exaggerate physical features, like maybe Buller had a famously swollen, gouty thumb he kept wrapped up on the bench.
Oh, I see.
Or maybe he made a weird, specific hand gesture while yelling at an attorney. Or perhaps it referenced a completely mundane, minor property dispute where someone measured a boundary line with their thumb and Buller just made a fool of himself over it.
So it was likely an inside joke for the people living in London that specific week in 1782.
Exactly. It made perfect sense to a guy walking down Fleet Street that Tuesday, but the context was entirely lost to time.
No.
And decades later, amateur historians found this cartoon of an arrogant judge named Judge Thumb.
And because the phrase rule of thumb already existed in the lexicon, they just mashed the two together.
They retrofitted a dark backstory to connect the dots. The phrase already existed, they found a cartoon with the word thumb, and they glued them together to build a grim, sensational narrative.
That's wild. It really shows the mechanics of how easily our understanding of history can be overwritten by a juicy story.
People really want the secret, dark history of everyday things.
They do. But this timeline completely clears Sir Francis Buller off the suspect list for inventing the phrase.
Oh, absolutely.
So since he couldn't have coined it, we have to look at the people who actually needed this phrase to survive.
Let's do it.
Let's travel back to that 1658 date. If it wasn't a judge creating a cruel law, how was the phrase actually being used in its original context?
To find that out, we turn to a printed speech from 1658, delivered by a Scottish Christian preacher named James Durham.
Okay, James Durham.
This document provides the earliest known anchor for the phrase. In this speech, Durham was making a theological point using a very practical metaphor.
What did he say?
He explained that, and I'll quote him here, many professed Christians are like to foolish builders who build by guess and by rule of thumb, as we used to speak, and not by square and rule.
Okay, let's break that quote down. Many professed Christians are like to foolish builders who build by guess and by rule of thumb.
Yep.
And not by square and rule? That's a brilliant, highly specific contrast.
It really is.
He's putting rule of thumb directly opposite to square and rule.
Yes, and that contrast tells us everything about the literal physical reality of the 1600s. You have to imagine a world long before standardized, laser-precise instruments.
Right, no digital levels or anything.
Exactly. No mass-produced measuring tapes available at the local hardware store. A square and rule referred to the literal tools of an elite architect or master mason.
Like the really precise stuff.
Yeah, the T-squares, the plumb bobs, the exact right angles you'd need to build a cathedral that won't collapse.
So the square and rule is the absolute pinnacle of precision.
Right. But what if you aren't building a cathedral?
What if you're just a regular person?
Exactly. What if you're just a farmer throwing together a rudimentary shed, or a painter trying to block out the proportions of a canvas out in a field somewhere?
You don't have those expensive, exact tools.
No, you don't. The source material explains that the phrase was used to describe making rough, approximate measurements. You use what you have.
Which is your body.
Yeah. You hold your thumb up to your subject to gauge its dimensions. You use the wick of your thumb to space out planks of wood.
Oh, I love this. It's exactly like the difference between baking with a highly precise digital kitchen scale,
Oh, that's a great comparison.
where you are measuring your flour and yeast down to the exact, scientifically perfect gram.
Right. That's Durham's square and rule.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have rule of thumb, which is like a grandmother who has been cooking the same family recipe for 50 years.
She definitely doesn't use measuring cups.
No. She just throws in a pinch of this, a handful of that, and relies entirely on her own physical intuition.
Absolutely.
She isn't using exact geometry. She's relying on experience and a rough approximation, and the cake still comes out great.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals something incredibly fundamental and honestly beautiful about human ingenuity.
How so?
Well, before we had global standardized metric systems, humans used their own digits and body parts as their very first toolkits.
Oh, to make sense of the physical world around them.
Exactly.
Right, like how the measurement of a foot was literally based on the average length of a human foot.
Yes. Or how people still measure the height of horses and hands.
Oh, I totally forgot about that. Yes.
Or how the ancient cubit was just the length of a man's forearm from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger.
Wow.
The Oxford English Dictionary explicitly confirms this origin for our phrase. They state that rule of thumb was coined on account of the thumb being used as a reference for approximate measurements of various kinds.
So the thumb in rule of thumb is literally just the digit on your hand.
That's all it is.
It's a testament to human practicality. When we didn't have a ruler in our pocket, we used our bodies to navigate, build, and measure our environment.
It's so cool.
It's so much more practical and honestly, so much more innocent than the dark, violent legal myth we started with.
It really is a relief.
It's just a builder, an artist, or a cook using their own hand to figure out how big something should be.
It completely strips away all the sensationalism and leaves us with a very grounded, very human origin story. It's about craftsmen just trying to get a job done.
So from foolish builders in 1658 to fake history and antique internet-style memes in the 1700s, we really need to zoom out.
Yeah, let's look at the big takeaway.
Let's synthesize what this whole journey actually teaches us. So what does this all mean?
Right.
For you, listening to this right now, why does the etymology of this one little phrase actually matter in your day-to-day life?
It's a good question.
I think it's a vital lesson in information literacy and critical thinking.
Hmm.
We live in an era where we are constantly bombarded with stories, facts, and little historical tidbits that we just, scroll past in seconds.
Yeah, just constantly swiping through information.
And this story perfectly illustrates that just because a narrative is shocking and just because it contains a tiny kernel of historical truth, like the existence of a real cartoon from 1782,
Yep.
that doesn't mean the narrative attached to it is factual.
That's a crucial takeaway for anyone navigating today's media landscape.
Definitely.
It's a reminder that folklore and false narratives are often much more seductive than the mundane truth.
They are so much catchier.
The myth of Sir Francis Buller provided a clear villain, a sense of righteous moral outrage, and a neat, tidy explanation for a quirk of our language.
It had all the elements of a good movie.
Exactly. The real story that everyday people just use their thumbs to measure planks of wood is undeniably less dramatic, but it has the supreme advantage of being the truth. We are psychologically wired to prefer the dramatic secret over the boring reality.
Exactly. It forces us to take a step back and ask ourselves a hard question. When we hear a piece of trivia that sounds a little too perfectly dramatic or, confirms our biases a little too neatly, are we actually verifying it?
Usually not.
Or are we just accepting it because it makes for a really good story at a dinner party?
This raises an important question, especially when we consider your earlier analogy about internet memes and that 18th century cartoon.
Oh, yeah.
If a single, out-of-context satirical drawing from 1782 successfully overwrote the history of an innocent, everyday phrase for centuries,
Yeah.
what modern satirical memes, viral jokes, or out-of-context screenshots are you casually scrolling past today that might be accepted as literal, undeniable history by future generations?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Will historians hundreds of years from now be looking at our memes and writing entirely fake, dark histories about how we live?
It's highly likely.
The next time you prep for a meeting, try out a new recipe or rely on a simple rule of thumb to get you through the day. Remember the incredibly muddy waters of history. Sometimes the things we think we see clearly are just a trick of the light, waiting for someone to finally break out the square and rule and measure the truth.